Hello guys, welcome to Mr. Valentin's YouTube video for the To Be or Not to Be soliloquy. We're going to be examining what we've memorized in class. Remember, if you're watching this video, don't be watching it just on YouTube. Make sure you're watching it with the Zaption, alright, so that way you can engage yourself with various questions throughout our reviewing of the monologue / soliloquy. So, let's take a look at the opening lines. The text begins, to be or not to be? That is the question. So, of course, when we open up to this, we should think, what does that mean? What is the question at hand? So, my question is, so this is a soliloquy about existence. Some people say, well, that's simplifying things, and it certainly is. But in many ways, we're exploring not just death, not just life, not just being, all right? It's existence. Does life matter? Does life matter to Hamlet? SparkNotes changes it. If you look at SparkNotes, it says, the question is it better to be alive or dead? But that's not what Hamlet's asking. He's asking, does it matter? Does my existence matter at all? Now, I don't have any answers to this information, of course, but the ideas that he is gesturing, all right, certainly matter. The second line reads, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer. And we're going to continue on. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Or to take against a sea of troubles. Now, hopefully, you know what goes inside of the blank, which, as you saw in your passage, should be. So what does this all mean? All right, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer. All right, so we're taking a look at the mind. All right, if you think of something noble, all right, is it better to put up with the mind that suffers? The question is Hamlet suffering? And then you have to ask yourself, is Hamlet crazy? Is he mad? And if he is crazy, and he's acknowledging this, is it worth living? Or is he better off dead? And life throws many hardships, all right? The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. So, he doesn't know what to do, all right? He has no idea how to approach things. It's kind of depressing, but it is Hamlet, so there's no surprise there. So let's go down a little further, see if we can make a little more sense of this exploration. So after, all right, taking arms of the sea of troubles, all right, we have, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep. So does Hamlet accomplish anything in all of this? All right. If he ends it, does he solve anything? If he dies, does it do anything? To die, he goes on to sleep. So what is the next line? Hopefully, all right, you figured out the next line is no more, and by asleep to say we end. So, for Hamlet, he's comparing death to sleep. It's somewhat romantic, right? But is death, is sleep the same thing? Well, we have to hear more of his speech to kind of figure that out. Right? He goes on to say, the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks. Now, you can look at this two ways. You could look at the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks as how the world is treating him, which is clearly very poorly. But if we're not looking at it like that, then who might have heartache for Hamlet? Who would care about him? Again, I'm not posing any answers here. This is all very rhetorical in nature, all right? Rhetorical questions, we would say. Remember, a rhetorical question is a question that doesn't have any answer. Hamlet doesn't actually expect any answers from all of this. He's just exploring his ideas, exploring his themes. Let's continue on. That flesh is air too. What does air mean in the context of our passage? So hopefully you figured out that an heir is a person who inherits something. Right? And so what's left of us when we're dead? Really, just our flesh. 'Tis a consummation, devoutly to be wished. Now, is he wishing for death? Is he desiring for death? And the word consummation, what does that mean? Hopefully, you figured out that the root word is consume, right? And that the body is giving up, all right? It's destroying itself. After all, every moment of every minute is just inching closer and closer to death. So he says, devoutly to be wished. And then he repeats, to die, to sleep. And this is where he really starts to explore the idea of death and sleep together. He says, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. It's kind of like an exclamation. All right, kind of like, it could be, oh, but there's a catch. It could be like, that's a joke. All right, all depends on what rub is. All right, rub could be like rubbish, which in case then it is a joke. But other interpreters say, but there's something else about death. All right, but there's the catch. All right, he says, for in that sleep of death, what dreams may come. It's almost fairy tale-like in its conjecture. What dreams may come. We talked about this. This was a famous movie starring whom? So as I mentioned, it's a famous movie starring Robin Williams. And in this movie, it deals with ideas of suicide and what happens to people when they die. Right? And we have to think, if Hamlet kills himself, and death is like sleep, why might that not be a good thing? And of course, nightmares. Sleep can be beautiful, it can be enjoyable, it can be fantastical, but it can also be nightmarish. And there's always a chance you're not in control. He continues on to say, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. So pausing right there, I'm looking between this and the spark notes, and they say, but there's a catch. In death, sleep, who knows that kind of dreams might come? But we've put the noise and the commotion of life behind us. So when we've shuffled off this mortal coil, according to spark notes, they say, when we've left the commotion of life. But when I hear the word mortal, I hear something far more fleshy, something more substantiate. So in many ways, when I hear mortal coil, I think of our being. What are we outside of the human self? Are we just flesh and bones? Or are we something more? We have to realize there's the respect. We have to respect life. Whether Hamlet wants to kill himself or not, it doesn't matter. He has to answer that question. Hamlet continues on and says, that makes, what's the word that comes after makes? Calamity. What does calamity mean? Chaos. Craziness. Remember, I mentioned that calamity is continually mentioned throughout Shakespeare's plays, such as Romeo and Juliet. In Romeo and Juliet, Juliet's married to death. Romeo is married to calamity. So there's kind of like this idea of chaos. So he says that makes calamity of so long life. That we have to consider that life is stressful and crazy and chaotic. And it unfortunately makes life long. He goes on, for who would bear the whips and scorns of time? And I think that's a great question. Who's going to deal with this? This sounds like a nightmare, right? That life, especially for Hamlet, but we can't help but reflect on ourselves, is stressful and maybe not worth living. Now again, we're dealing with Shakespeare, so this is all according to Shakespeare, all right? But he is raising good points that you hear the word whips and scorns, and what do you think? Well, certainly not happy thoughts, all right? Whips and scorns, it sounds like terror. Something horrible is happening, right? So we need to explore that. If while you're listening to this you hear any heavy snarling, that's just my pug sitting next to me, so pardon that. He goes on. There's 4 thes right after. He says, the oppressor's wrong. The proud man's contumely. The pangs of despised love. The law's delay. Oops. he starts listing of all the calamities that could happen, right? That the people who are abusers, the proud man is someone who thinks highly of themselves, someone who's arrogant. That the pangs of despised love, if we're thinking about Ophelia, the heartache he's going through, which, granted, is part of his problem, but that's another discussion. Right? The law's delay. That the law has problems. Right? He's raising all sorts of questions. And at the end of the day, does any of this make life worth living? He goes on to say, the insolence of office and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes. And this is probably the most depressing line in this whole thing, that good people take from the bad. That no matter how good you are, the patient, the honorable, they're going to internalize the bad. So what's the next line? The next line reads, when he himself might his quietest make with a bare bodkin? He's asking another question. All right. And the question is, what is a bodkin? So here he's saying, when he himself, when Hamlet might his quietest make, when he can make himself quiet, kill himself, with a bare bodkin, with a knife, who would these fardels bear? Fardel is kind of an archaic word at this point. And when I say archaic, I mean it doesn't have any value. So don't look too much into it. All right, but who would bear this life? We've gone through all this horrible information. What does it all mean? And so, for what we've done and what we've memorized, we finish with, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death. Now, I chose to end here for our memorization. Now, we obviously did all of this in class, but we didn't explore it as maybe in depth as we're doing right now. That I think the story is emphasizing existence. And so to end with his idea of mentioning death, I think that was a good point to stop, because our brain can only contain so much memory. Right? But to grunt and sweat under a weary life, what is he saying about life? Life is hard. It's not enjoyable sometimes. And then he says, but that the dread of something after death. And so the question is, what's left? And is there something worse after death? Right? If you're dreading something, you're not looking forward to it. So that's where we end today. All right. So hopefully you thought about all of this. You think of the questions that have been raised. And hopefully you understand a little bit more about what Hamlet is trying to say. For more reviews and more about Hamlet, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or ask me questions after class. Have a great day.